At the beginning of 2020, the NFL announced that it had granted a license to 2K Games to publish one, or potentially more, NFL-licensed video games. The catch is that the license only covers non-simulation video games. Presumably, this means that 2K can only make something in the style of NFL Blitz or NFL Street, both of which, by the way, are IPs that are currently owned by Electronic Arts. Our hopes of a revival of the NFL 2K series and a genuine sequel to NFL 2K5 were squashed. Electronic Arts remains the one and only license holder of simulation NFL games. But what exactly has EA been doing with that license? Well, in 2011, Madden 12 introduced Ultimate Team, an arcade mode about buying virtual trading cards that lets you put the player on the card into your personal NFL Dream Team. That mode has, for the last 10 years, been built upon a pay-to-win microtransaction economy. Madden 12 also happened to be the last iteration of Madden that included the full classic franchise mode. After that, EA and Tiburon started building a new franchise mode in which many of the old features were left on the cutting room floor. Ever since, franchise mode has received minimal attention and improvements each year. The franchise mode in Madden 21 plays largely identical to the franchise mode in Madden 16. In the meantime, Ultimate Team has received extensive modifications from year to year, and has even seen entire new modes of play added by mid-year patches. Standalone game modes such as Draft Champions have been rolled into Ultimate Team. We've also been given the Long Shot Story Mode and Face of the Franchise, which EA has attempted to brand as extensions to the franchise mode, but most of us franchise players are not buying it. We've also seen additional arcade modes such as Superstar KO, and now, with Madden 21, The Yard. EA and Tiburon have been throwing darts at a board, experimenting with pretty much everything except for the simulation franchise mode that they hold the exclusive rights to create. Look, if Madden already had a deep, robust, and engaging franchise mode on par with the breadth and quality of the mode from 10 to 20 years ago, and they continued to support it every year with new features and AI logic improvements, then I'd be perfectly fine with the team branching out and experimenting with new game modes. But that is not the case. Franchise mode has been a half-baked, bug-riddled, lackluster experience since at least Madden 13. Year after year, EA and Tiburon tell us that they hear us and are committed to improving franchise mode, but year after year, we get a supposed new feature list that reads more like it should have been an October patch for last year's game. In this regard, Madden 21 is the worst offender yet, because there is absolutely nothing new in the franchise mode, at least not at the game's launch back in August. We had to wait until October before EA even bothered to acknowledge that franchise mode exists in Madden 21, and for them to promise updates. But this video isn't really about franchise mode. It's actually about the new arcade mode, The Yard. What I'm about to discuss is pulled almost verbatim from my Madden 21 review on my personal blog at www.MegaBearsFan.net, but this video is not a review of Madden 21. It's basically just a set of impressions on the new The Yard arcade game mode. If you want a full review of the game as a whole, including what EA calls a franchise mode, then feel free to check out the blog for the whole thing. Even though I'm frustrated to see yet another arcade mode that feels nothing like actual football being added to the game to the total exclusion of any franchise mode updates, I do have to admit that I'm not actually all that upset about The Yard. It's actually a game mode that I might even enjoy playing. I would definitely enjoy it more than Ultimate Team, Superstar KO, or any of the other arcade game modes that EA has experimented with. Of course, it's not simulation football, so I just don't really have all that much interest in it to begin with. But as a supplement to a good, satisfying simulation football experience, I would actually probably be able to enjoy it. The Yard is basically a modernized but less developed version of EA's old NFL Street games. Despite still being a microtransaction-fueled online multiplayer-focused arcade mode, the fact that this is not built on a pay-to-win gambling architecture makes the Yard feel a lot less cynically manipulative than Ultimate Team. It feels like a less brazen, less anti-consumer scam, and more like a genuine attempt to make a fun game first, and then stick an optional microtransaction economy on top of it, although I'm sure that the actual design went the other way around. It's still bad, and it's still cynical and still exploitative, especially in the wake of Star Wars Squadrons, which was also published by EA, had a online multiplayer focus, but was not built on microtransactions, and in fact has no microtransactions at all, at least not as of the time of this recording. But the Yard is at least a less bad, less cynical, and less exploitative mode than the other efforts that EA has made in the past. That being said, the cost of these purely cosmetic accessories is downright absurd. EA seems to think that a virtual helmet is somehow worth between $5 and $20. Did somebody on the UI team fuck up and accidentally shift a decimal 2 places for these microtransaction costs? 20 cents? Maybe. But $20? Are you fucking kidding me, EA? $20 is what I expect to pay for an entire expansion pack, or for a really good indie game. Not for a single cosmetic novelty item that's probably going to disappear when next year's version of the game comes out. The cynic in me believes that this exorbitant cost is a deliberate attempt by EA at self-sabotaging their own microtransaction store. Maybe they think that if they jack up the prices ridiculously high for these cosmetics, nobody will be willing to pay for them. They could then go back to offering gambling, pay-to-win loot boxes, and then blame us, the consumers, who are being scammed for it. Well, we offered cosmetic-only microtransactions, but you didn't want to buy them. The market has spoken and clearly prefers randomized surprise mechanics. Ugh. My first impressions of the Yard were further hampered by several significant bugs. The most egregious was several instances in which the scoreboard overlay graphic became corrupted, and I could not read the score. Considering that the Yard has weird scoring rules, it's much harder to determine and track the current score in my head. At least it is for me. I don't know, maybe if I got more used to it, I wouldn't have as much of a problem. But in one of these occurrences in which the scoreboard glitched out on me, I scored a touchdown in my final drive, but because I couldn't read the scoreboard, I was unsure of how many points I had compared to the CPU team, so I was unsure of whether to go for 1, 2, or 3, because I couldn't remember exactly how far I was down. I think I ended up trying to go for 3 just to be safe, but failed to convert it, and then lost the match by 1 point. I could have gone for 1 to tie it, or I could have gone for 2 and had a much easier time of winning. In general, UI feedback in this mode is generally pretty poor, or at least it was at launch when I played it. It's not very intuitive what the rewards for a particular match or challenge are going to be. I frequently come back from a match and the game gives me no experience points, but then I get a skill point instead. I don't know why it sometimes gives skill points and other times it gives experience. I thought that the skill points were supposed to be the reward for leveling up via the experience. I'm not quite sure what the heck's going on here. I also feel like the Yard presented a primo opportunity for EA and Tiburon to finally add women to the game. This is, after all, self-described backyard football, so there is absolutely no reason why women shouldn't be included. Having at least a couple token female faces, hairstyles, and voices, along with a female body archetype, would have added some welcome extra diversity to the game mode. Women like football, and women play Madden. They should have an opportunity to feel represented in the game, especially in a backyard football arcade game mode. I've played backyard football in real life with quite a few women in my youth, and some of them were pretty damn good. To an extent, I even share such women's feelings of not being adequately represented in the Yard. I didn't find a single face in the game mode that looked like mine. The morph features also make hardly any difference at all. I couldn't even make my avatar look a little bit chubby. I guess I finally get a taste of what it felt like for all the underrepresented minorities who never got to see themselves in games in the past. Poetic justice, I suppose. In any case, I certainly approve of the diversity, and I approve of EA finally putting some social justice messaging in their game in the form of all the end racism gear and the solidarity celebrations that you're allowed to do after you score. So, complaints about UI and bugs and the lack of some diversity notwithstanding, I did actually notice some promising, dare I say, improvements, for lack of a better word, to core gameplay and animation while I was playing the Yard. The first thing I noticed was that inaccurate passes would sail just a couple of yards over the head of a receiver, instead of missing by a mile, as has been the case in past iterations of Madden. In the past, a similarly positioned pass would result in the receiver shifting or being given a speed burst to make the catch. I haven't seen that happening at all this year. If receivers aren't in position to make the catch, they aren't making them. It would be nice if they'd actually, put their arms out to at least make an effort to try to catch the damn ball, but one thing at a time, I guess. On the other side of the coin, however, is that defensive backs are still getting their speed bursts to allow them to jump routes and break up passes or make interceptions, which, completely negates the receiver's position advantage on otherwise accurate passes. Madden 21 and the Yard thus retains the long-standing problem in the series of there being too many cheap interceptions. In general, though, I've actually thought that player movement has been looking a lot more fluid when I'm playing the Yard. Tackles look cleaner, receivers run better routes, defenders seem to perform better in their assignments, especially in zone assignments, because zone coverage in the actual 11-on-11 football is atrocious in this year's version of the game. I can't help but wonder if stripping down the gameplay to this 6-on-6 arcade mode may have actually improved the performance of the underlying physics and AI engines. Removing all of the linemen and all of the collisions and interactions in the trenches that come along with them may have, ironically, freed up more of the console's CPU resources to more precisely calculate the remaining individual players' movements and positioning. It probably also helps with pathfinding and other aspects of player AI that may allow the CPU-controlled players to do a better job on their respective play assignments for both offense and defense. This mode just simply has so much less for the CPU to consider and so much less work for the CPU to do. I haven't played much multiplayer for the Yard yet, so I don't know if all of this is the same in multiplayer. I'm only noticing it in the user versus CPU games that I've been doing. In fact, I've even noticed that the Yard seems to resist gang tackles. Even in opportunities in which a dogpile or scrum could happen with, just 12 players on the field, defenders will usually just stop or jump over or sidestep around a one-on-one tackle animation in progress, rather than attempting to pile on as they might try to do in the 11-on-11 mode. And it isn't even a case of the extra players, shifting out of the way, or warping, or clipping through, or tumbleweeding around the tackle animation, as has been the case in earlier versions of Madden, and as still happens in the 11-on-11 game modes. The players are actually, playing animations of the extraneous defenders intentionally avoiding getting involved in the tackle, instead of cleaning up the tackle. A second defender will still make a consecutive hit or simultaneous tackle in some instances, but from what I've played so far, it's rare. To my surprise, I never once noticed a defender avoid involving himself in a tackle that ended up being broken, which has been another big problem in past iterations of Madden. Instead, if a defender avoids joining in on the tackle, it was always because the tackle was going to get made anyway. It's as if the game knows whether the tackle will be a success before it happens, and it disables the extra collision if it won't have an impact on the play, but allows the extra collision if it might impact the play. In fact, predetermining the outcome of an interaction like this, by the way, is exactly the sort of thing that simulation fans have been complaining about for years. The Yard only seems to expose and validate those complaints. It's as if Tiburon deliberately took away or disabled as many potential interactions as they could practically get away with in order to give a maximum feeling of precision and control to this scaled-down arcade game mode. And the yard feels more fluid and organic than its 11-on-11 simulation counterpart because of it. And much to my surprise, it actually works. All in all, I admit that the yard is not all that bad. Aside from the aforementioned bugs, which I'm assuming will get fixed over time, the mode plays well enough. If it ends up supplanting Ultimate Team as the arcade or casual player's mode of choice, I think that might actually be an improvement to Madden as a product. It's still just simply not something that I'm going to care about playing all that often. When I boot up an NFL football video game, I do so because I want to play NFL football, not some silly backyard ball. This, by the way, is also why I never got into games like NFL Street or Blitz the League. I may have played a demo for NFL Street on an official PlayStation Magazine demo disc back in the day. I don't know, was I still getting OPM as late as 2004? I think so. Anyway, I looked up the cost to buy a used copy of either of the first two games, and it looks like they are reasonably priced, as long as I stick to eBay and not Amazon. So I'm going to put up a poll for my patrons. What do you think? Should I buy a copy of NFL Street, give it a play, and maybe make a video commentary about it in anticipation of 2K's arcade game that is supposedly due out in 2021? If you think I should, then this poll will be available to all patrons pledging at the $2 level or higher. If you'd prefer that I spend my time critiquing the modern games or the simulation games, then you can vote for that too. A link to the poll will be in the description of this video. If I do buy one of the NFL Street games, I'll definitely stay away from the third one. I've read that it sucked. I've played enough sucky football games over the last 15 years. I don't need another one. If the yard were a $30 or $40 mid-shelf game, like Star Wars Squadrons, with local multiplayer, then I might play it with a friend who doesn't actually care much about football, but did like NFL Blitz back in the day, so might be interested in trying this out. Or I might play it with my kid and some of her friends. But as it stands now, the yard is never going to supplant my interest or desire for a robust simulation franchise mode. My big fear here is that if EA moves away from selling illegal, unregulated gambling to minors via its 11-on-11 Ultimate Team cash cow, and instead migrates towards 6-on-6 the yard with cosmetic microtransactions only as its new cash cow, then will we simulation fans see less attention paid to the 11-on-11 supposedly simulation gameplay? If most of the competitive and casual players, who also happen to be the ones buying those microtransactions, move away from the 11-on-11 ball and towards 6-on-6 backyard ball, would EA then focus on improving the 6-on-6 gameplay to the total exclusion of the 11-on-11 gameplay in the same way that they continue to upgrade MUT to the total exclusion of franchise mode? That is the fear. But hey, the upshot is at least they wouldn't be selling unregulated gambling to minors anymore. That, I guess, is an improvement from a moral and ethical standpoint. And it would mean no more pay-to-win gameplay, which would, I guess, also be an improvement from a consumer and gameplay standpoint. The big takeaway for me regarding the yard is that it looks like EA is preemptively trying to compete with 2K's upcoming NFL licensed arcade game, whatever that ends up being. For us simulation fans, Madden 21 is probably the most disappointing Madden ever, in that EA didn't even bother to include token franchise mode improvements until almost 3 months after release and halfway through the NFL season. Again, that being said, the yard isn't bad. If it were a standalone $30 or $40 game with local multiplayer, which is something that, NFL Street provided back in the day, I might actually play the yard with friends. I do think that it's telling that the best new game mode that EA has added to Madden in the past 15 years happens to be the game mode that is the most divorced from simulation NFL football. It's almost as if EA themselves are trying to make the case that they are the ones who should have the arcade NFL license, because they are either unwilling or incapable of making a simulation game, and that the simulation NFL license should instead go to a different company that actually gives a damn about simulation sports.
Touchdown. 3-7. Squeezed by two defenders on this play, but still comes up with the ball. Oh, that's pure skill. You can't coach that.
That's his first touchdown of the day.